Hi there everyone, I'm Alistair Ben and you're watching Expressive Photography. In today's video I want to look at processing. In particular I'm going to be using Adobe Lightroom. Now if you use different software the principle is going to be the same, so it's not necessarily the tools that I'm going to be using, it's more the concepts that I'm going to be talking about. So if you're using DxO Photolab or Capture One or any other processing software, the tips that I'm going to be giving you now are going to be the same. What do I want to talk about today? Well, one of the things I see an awful lot with clients is either images that have been processed poorly, and by that I mean there are obvious processing errors. If I'm looking at an image and I'm thinking, well, why did they do that? Or, it seems a little bit rough here, or there's too much of this or too much of that, or it's not feeling balanced. Or if I'm noticing the processing, then I think that that is an indication that something has gone wrong in that process. If I look at an image and I'm just sucked into the feel and the beauty and the kind of aesthetics of the whole thing, and I'm not noticing explicit processing problems, then I know that it's been processed by someone who's taken due care and attention and knows what they're doing. So in this video today, what I want to address is, are there simple mistakes that we can avoid making to make our processing better straight off the bat? And then secondly, what is the best way to approach a photograph, understanding the limitations of the raw file itself and how to make the images feel better? I've used that word feel already and I'll be using it multiple times in this. I believe that good photographic processing is a function of feel, not technique. Of course, we want technique to be important and we need to understand when to use certain techniques. But if we don't know what we want to try and achieve, or we can't feel when it's going wrong, then we're never really going to improve. I've just jumped into my Lightroom catalog here and literally pulled up an image at random, and I've gone back quite a number of years. This is actually taken in 2015 on the Isle of Skye from a very famous beach, which I do love going to. And I literally just pulled up an image at random because I don't want to overthink it. I haven't practiced with this image beforehand, so what you're going to see is me hitting this completely fresh off the bat. So this isn't rehearsed. I think the first thing with any image is to feel like you want to process it. If you're opening an image and it's not speaking to you, or it's not giving you any clues or signals, it's probably not the best time to approach that image. I think a really good starting point for anybody with their creativity is to be excited about moving forward. If this image doesn't ask me to process it, then we're kind of scuppered. Now, I've chosen this one at random today and I do want to process it. It's an image I'd forgotten I'd taken, to be honest, being 10 years old and all. The first thing I notice is that it's actually bang on the rule of thirds. And as someone who continually talks about shying away from rules, it makes me smile. So what I am actually going to do is I'm just going to pull in from that left-hand side a little bit and lift up this image a fraction. And I'm not going to get it entirely away from the rule of thirds, but it's far enough to make me feel a little bit better. One of the things that cameras do is we continually work in a world of compromise. Any exposure is going to be a kind of an average across the scene. And what can happen with scenes like this is that the camera is making decisions that have to be an average. They can't have multiple white balance settings in a single photograph. So the first thing I really notice about this image is it's quite blue. This is my first tip on better processing, is notice something that's not sitting right with you and correct that first. So already I've come in and I've sorted out the crop. I've kept in a 3:2 aspect ratio, seems to fit, everything seems fine. I don't want to start cropping this down too much, but I might change my mind later. The second thing I'm noticing is it's a bit blue. So if I think it's blue, I think to myself, well, is this something that I want in the scene, or is this something I want to change? Now, if we were to do something bold, just like hitting the the white balance color picker there, it's made things a little bit green. It's changed that color palette a little, and I actually kind of prefer it blue. But one of the things that we can do is just move it around until it feels a little better. So it's still blue, but it's less blue than it was. The second thing I want to talk about, so point number one was correct the things first that are bugging you. And the second is understanding when to go from global adjustments to local adjustments. This is the thing that separates good processors from the rest. Good processors understand when to go local. In this scene, I don't believe a single white balance. So if we warm it up, then it all gets a bit brown. If it goes too cool, it all gets a bit blue. So there's somewhere in the middle that I think is about right. I'm looking at the water mainly. That's my guide, is the water and the clouds. So it is still a little bit blue, but I can very, very quickly come in, grab a linear gradient, pull this up, and just warm that foreground. And it doesn't need to be much. So I'm pulling up those into the yellow part of the temperature spectrum, and it's creating that slightly warmer foreground. If we think about why I made that decision, there's two reasons for it. First of all is it changes the emphasis of how the viewer looks at the image, because having a warmer foreground creates a difference. We've created a transition between a warmer foreground and a cooler background. And in this particular case, that is going to increase depth. So if I start thinking about the concept of depth, by adding warmth to that foreground, I instantly, subtly suggest that looking at the foreground before the background is a good thing to do. It creates that sense of three-dimensionality. Now, there are other things I can do to this foreground. I can add a tiny bit of exposure. I could come in and add a little bit of texture or a little bit of clarity. And all of those adjustments, if I just turn them all off, it's pretty subtle, but it is noticeable. Before we made those adjustments, the color palette is similar. We have a color palette that's constant through the frame. As soon as I show you that adjustment, we suddenly see that the foreground feels closer, is definitely warmer. It definitely feels more tactile. It has more detail. And that sense of three-dimensionality it may be subtle, but it is profound. So that is my second tip, is to understand that by making quite broad brushstroke local adjustments, just with a single gradient there, we can create considerable depth in a two-dimensional surface. Instead of having the image like that, flat on the plane, we're just tipping it back a little bit so the back feels like it's receding a little bit. I could actually come in and create a second linear gradient here. And instead of adding clarity, I can take it away. I can take away a little bit of texture, a little bit of clarity, and even add a little bit of negative dehaze. And that is doing the same thing. It's pushing the back further back, and that in its own right makes the front feel a little bit closer, a little bit more three-dimensional. So that is a really, really simple way of, if I make that adjustment globally, so I think I'll just make a virtual copy of this image, and I'll reset it, and I'll just come in and bring down that crop a little bit. And instead of making those adjustments locally, I'm going to make them globally. So I'm going to try and fix that image. So I'll sort out the temperature a little bit. I'm going to add the clarity that I did. I'm going to add the texture. Now I can't take away the dehaze from the back because I can't do that as a global adjustment. So I'm kind of stuck with that. But I have tried to changed the temperature, and I have changed the clarity. Now, this image has quite a lot of impact because clarity has been added globally, and that is a way to say everything in this scene is more important than it was. So if I skip back to the previous version, if I skip between these two versions of the photograph, the one where I did the global texture and clarity and temperature adjustments actually has more impact because it's saying, look at me, there's more volume in it. Whereas the more subtle version has differences. It has a difference between temperature between front and back. It has difference between texture and clarity between the front and the back. We are saying that the front and the back are not the same. And I think this is absolutely fundamental in good processing, is to tell the viewer that there are differences in this frame. One of the biggest mistakes I think a lot of photographers make, I'm not going to insult anybody by using the word beginner or novice, or I'm not going to try and inflate anybody's ego by using the word pro either. The thing that gets most people with this is they forget what it looks like when they're there. They forget why they pointed their camera at things in the first place. This scene, when I was there, the depth, the distance between the foreground and the background is huge. You're looking right across a fjord here, a number of miles across to the other side of the fjord. It shouldn't feel as if I can reach out and touch those mountains in the background. So we forget that we are trying to make landscape photographs, or we can make landscape photographs that represent space, three-dimensionality, depth, grandeur, expansiveness. And if we crush everything together by giving it all the same temperature or all the same clarity or texture, then we can fall foul of that. There is a sensor spot that has been driving me utterly crazy since I've been talking, so I'm going to correct those. There are a few others on here. This is my third tip, which is there should be a couple of words or a little phrase that you should memorize to make sure you never fall foul of this. Care has been taken. Those 4 words will get you out of creative jail. You will pass go and collect £200. I can guarantee it. Care has been taken. I see it too often. People posting images online with sensor spots. I see people putting work in towards competitions or into print competitions and photo clubs and so forth with sensor spots on them. Care has not been taken. I've said it many times when I did my book Out of Darkness, I had sleepless nights worrying about sensor spots appearing in the final printed book. I can't tell you how many times I looked through the book to make sure there was no sensor spots. But things like that, little attention to detail, separates people on top of their game and everybody else. So it's really quite simple. Processing should be about taking a 2-dimensional image and using subtle skills and attention to detail to stretch out that depth of field. We do it with music as well. We have a spectrum where we have lows and mids and highs, and we separate those when we mix music so that we have a clear distinction, so things can stand out against the noise of other instruments. This is exactly the same. We use space and separation and creating differences through good, thoughtful processing to make sure that it doesn't just all sit in that same part of the spectrum. If everything is noisy, I've seen too many images. Now this one's got back to the sensor spots. Bear with me. This is my global version, but it's still annoying me. People say that I've got OCD. If I crank up the clarity here and crank up the texture, this image undeniably has impact. And a lot of people who have a less discerning eye might look at this image and think, yeah, it looks great. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But don't forget that the majority of the majority of people who look at your photographs online are other photographers, and we are a picky bunch. And if you're not noticing these errors, then you should train yourself to notice these errors. Global clarity is something I see far too often, and because contrast is linked to saturation, the colors all get shifted, the thing just looks muddy and pretty disgusting. So we can I'm going to look at the foreground now and say, right, when to stop. So, let's say I'm going to put quite a bit of clarity into the foreground and come in, bring down a linear gradient, and the first thing I can do is take clarity away from the top. And as soon as you create that difference where one thing has a lot of something and something has less of that or a negative amount of that, you're creating a significant seesaw where one side goes down, the other side goes up. We know that there are differences, and that is the key to successful processing. I'm going to keep this relatively short. I don't want to bang on about it, but hopefully you'll have got something out of this video to maybe approach your own image processing with a little bit more thought, a little bit more care, and understanding that you should master small changes with more impact before you start trying to progress on to more complex scenes. I will bring out another one of these videos at some point during the autumn to look at some of the other things that I see in other people's processing on a regular basis. So you can look forward to me being very critical at some point in the future. I hope you've enjoyed this content. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you feel that is an appropriate thing to do. Jump into the comments. Is this helpful? Is this the type of video that you want to see on this channel? Or indeed tell me things that annoy you about other people's processing. That's always fun. Let's just dish the dirt. That's way more fun than this. Thanks for watching. Take care. I'm Alistair Ben in Expressive Photography. Bye for now.